My dad left me stranded at a gas station, laughing with his brothers as if it was the funniest joke in the world. The glow of the neon lights flickered above me, the air heavy with gasoline, and I stood frozen, wondering if my own dad truly meant to come back or if that was the moment he had finally erased me from his life. I was only a few steps from the road, yet it felt like a lifetime away from safety. The trucks rolled past on the highway, their headlights sweeping across my face, and I fought back the tears because I knew if I cried it would only mean they had won. That night I walked away, carrying nothing but betrayal and the strange spark of freedom that burned inside me. For years I built a new life brick by brick, holding on to the strength I had been forced to find. But the past has claws and it never really lets go. 3 years later, in a room filled with people, I felt the weight of that night crash back when my dad turned and saw me. His laughter was gone, replaced by the shock of someone who suddenly realized that jokes can turn into judgment. His eyes locked on the figure behind me, and in that instant his face drained of color. What could be so terrifying to a man who once thought abandoning his daughter was entertainment? What secret, what truth, what reckoning stood there demanding to be seen? This is not a story about a prank gone wrong. It is a story about betrayal, revenge, and the moment a family's silence shatters. Stay with me, and I will show you how one cruel night became the beginning of everything. It started on a humid summer evening, the kind where the air feels heavy enough to swallow you whole. My dad had decided we would drive out to the edge of town to meet some of his buddies. I didn't want to go, but in our house saying no wasn't an option. I slid into the back seat of the old Ford, my younger brother Adam sitting next to me, his eyes glued to his phone. Dad was in good spirits, humming along to a country song on the radio, laughing at jokes only he seemed to find funny. When we pulled into the gas station, the kind of place where the buzzing lights attract every month in a 5-mile radius, he told me to hop out and grab some sodas. I remember the way his voice carried that sharp edge, like it wasn't a request but an order. I did what I always did, I obeyed. I stepped out into the thick night air, pushed open the glass door, and felt the blast of cold air from inside the store. The man behind the counter barely looked up as I grabbed 2 bottles from the cooler. I paid, shoved the change into my pocket, and pushed back out into the night. For a second, I thought maybe I had walked out the wrong door. The spot where the car had been was empty. The blacktop stretched out in front of me, shimmering under the fluorescent lights, and there was no sign of our Ford. At first, I laughed nervously. It had to be a mistake. Maybe Dad had pulled around to the other side of the lot. I walked a few steps, then a few more, turning in circles, clutching those sodas like they were an anchor. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. My chest tightened as the truth settled in. They weren't coming back. The sound of insects buzzing filled the silence. Every time a car pulled off the highway, I held my breath, waiting for it to be him, but it never was. Fear crawled into my stomach and stayed there, twisting sharp and unrelenting. I tried to tell myself I could walk home, but it was miles away through dark back roads, and I had no phone, no money, nothing but the 2 sodas sweating in my hands. I don't know how long I sat on the curb outside that gas station, but it felt like the world had collapsed into that one moment. Every second stretched like an eternity, and the humiliation of being abandoned on purpose cut deeper than the fear of being alone in the dark. By the time an old pickup truck pulled in and the driver asked if I was okay, I couldn't answer. My throat locked up and all I could do was shake my head. I ended up calling my aunt from the payphone, my hands trembling so badly I could barely push the buttons. She came to get me, her face pale with shock, but she didn't ask questions. She just wrapped me in her sweater and drove me home. That night became a story in our town, one I didn't tell but everyone seemed to know. And that was only the beginning. The longer I sat on that curb outside the gas station, the more the sky darkened into a heavy purple, and the more I realized no one was coming back for me. My dad's laughter still echoed in my head, sharp as broken glass, and Tommy's nervous grin played over and over like a cruel loop. My throat was dry, my chest tight, but I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I needed to move even if my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. A pair of headlights swept across the lot, and for a moment I tensed, half expecting that familiar pickup. Instead, an older minivan rolled in, painted dull from years of salt and winters. The driver stepped out, a woman with kind eyes behind her glasses, her brown hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked at me not with judgment, but with that puzzled concern people have when they sense something isn't right. "You all right, honey?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. I opened my mouth and no sound came out. For a second, shame choked me. What was I supposed to say? My dad just left me here like trash. She waited, patient, her hand resting on the van door. Finally, I managed, I I don't have a ride. My phone died. Her eyes softened even more. Where are you headed? Anywhere but here, I wanted to say. Instead, I whispered Harborville. Her lips curved in a small smile. Well, that's where I'm going. Hop in if you trust me. There was a pause. I studied her face, the way she tilted her head, the faint tiredness in her eyes like she had raised kids of her own. I wanted to believe her. Something inside me said she wasn't the kind of person who'd laugh while abandoning someone. My body moved before my fear could stop me, and I climbed into the van. Inside smelled faintly of crayons and vanilla. A child's car seat sat in the back, with a stuffed bear buckled in like a silent passenger. She started the engine country radio, murmuring low, and glanced at me again. My name's Marcy, she said. Sarah! I answered, my voice almost swallowed by the hum of the engine. We drove in silence for a while, the road stretching out dark and endless. I stared out at the glowing signs, the blur of trees, and tried to steady my breath. Every so often she glanced at me, not prying, just checking. Finally, she said, You looked like you'd been waiting there a long time. I swallowed hard. My dad was supposed to give me a ride. He changed his mind. The words felt heavy, but not as humiliating as I feared. Maybe because she didn't laugh. She only gave a small shake of her head. Some folks don't know how to treat the people they should care for most. Her words hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. I bit my lip, staring down at my hands. The urge to explain bubbled up. He always says I'm too soft, that I need to learn the hard way. Marcy sighed, turning the wheel as we merged back onto the interstate. My daddy used to say the same to me. You know what I learned? Being kind isn't a weakness. It's what makes us human. I couldn't respond. My chest ached. My eyes burned, but for the first time that day, I didn't feel completely invisible. The drive stretched on headlights sweeping past, the night alive with the sound of tires on asphalt. My thoughts drifted back uninvited to childhood. I remembered being 12, clutching a science project I'd spent weeks on, only to see him stomp it flat in the grass, grinning while uncles clapped like it was some sort of joke. I remembered standing at school concerts, scanning the crowd and realizing he hadn't bothered to come. And now this. Being left behind wasn't new. It was just louder final. Marcy's voice cut through my memories. Harborville's about another half hour. Do you have someone there? I hesitated, then nodded. My aunt. I hadn't spoken to May in years, not since she stopped coming around after Mom died. Still, she was the only person I could think of. Good, Marcy said. A safe place is what you need. We rode on, and though I didn't say it, I silently thanked her. The air inside the van was warm and steady, so different from the hollow chill of the gas station lot. The stuffed bear in the back seat watched quietly, like a reminder that not all families abandon their children. As the miles slipped away, I felt the weight of humiliation settle into something else, something colder but sharper. This wasn't just a prank. This was who he had always been, and tonight he had finally shown me the truth. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window and let that realization sink deep. The van turned off the highway toward Harborville, streetlights casting soft pools of light over empty sidewalks. My body sagged with exhaustion, but my mind stayed awake, restless. Somewhere ahead, Aunt May's house waited, and with it a chance to start over. For the first time that night, I let out a breath that didn't shake. I still felt broken, but there was a fragile thread of hope pulling me forward, away from the laughter that once held me down. I could not stop thinking about what I had overheard between my dad and Nathan. The way they laughed about leaving me behind at that gas station still made my stomach twist. For so long, I had convinced myself that maybe it had been a misunderstanding, or at least something less cruel than it felt at the time. But hearing my dad call it the best joke he ever pulled stripped away the last excuse I had given him in my head. He had meant to hurt me. He had wanted to see me small and powerless. That realization burned inside me like a fire I could not put out. I carried it into my nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling. My mother would sometimes pass my room, pausing by the door, as if she wanted to step in but didn't know how. I wished she would. I wished she would tell me that she saw what I saw, that she felt what I felt. But she always walked on quiet as a shadow. One evening, I decided I could not keep all of it inside anymore. I needed to speak to someone who would actually listen. That was when I thought of Claire. She had been kind to me when I was younger, her house always smelling of coffee and cinnamon. She was the one adult who had ever looked me in the eye and treated me like my thoughts mattered. The next day, I told my mother I was going for a walk. She didn't ask questions, just nodded absently. I wrapped my notebook in an old sweater and tucked it under my arm. The walk to Claire's house was longer than I remembered, but the fresh air steadied me. Every step felt like I was pulling away from the fear that had held me still for so many years. When I reached her porch, my hands trembled. I knocked, and for a moment I almost turned to leave. But then the door opened, and there she was, older now, her hair streaked with silver. She smiled, surprised to see me. "Sarah," she said softly. "It's been years. Come in." Inside the house smelled just as I remembered. I sat at her kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten cookies when I was 10. Claire poured me a cup of tea and sat across from me. Her eyes were patient, waiting. I took a deep breath and placed the notebook on the table. "I've been writing," I said, my voice shaking. "And I need you to hear this." She nodded, and I opened to a page where I had described that night at the gas station, every detail etched into memory, the way the fluorescent lights buzzed above me, the sound of tires fading into the distance, the cold fear that wrapped around my chest. My voice cracked as I read, but Claire didn't interrupt. She just listened, her face tight with anger I knew wasn't directed at me. When I finished, silence filled the room. Finally, she reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "Sarah," she said firmly, "this is not just a story. This is evidence of abuse. You can't carry this alone anymore." Her words struck something deep inside me. Evidence. I had never thought of it that way. I thought of my notebooks as my only safe place, the place where I could scream without being heard. But evidence that meant these pages could hold power. I looked at her, searching her face for doubt, but all I saw was conviction. "What do I do with it?" I whispered. She leaned back, thinking. "You start by keeping everything safe. Every page, every memory, every detail. You write it down and you don't stop. Then when the time is right, we find someone who will listen, someone who can help." Her words stayed with me long after I left her house. That night I sat at my desk and wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote about the gas station, about the years of silence, about Nathan's smirks and my dad's booming voice. I wrote about my mother's quiet tears in the laundry room and how she dabbed them away before anyone could see. The more I wrote, the lighter I felt. For the first time, it seemed like I was building something, not just surviving. But the danger was never far away. Nathan noticed I was quieter than usual and started following me with more suspicion in his eyes. One afternoon, he barged into my room without knocking. I shoved my notebook under a pillow, my heart pounding. "What are you hiding?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "Nothing," I said quickly. He smirked. "You're always writing. Maybe I should read it, see what little Sarah is up to." I glared at him, the fear in my chest mixing with a new kind of anger. "Stay out of my things." He laughed, leaning against the doorframe. "Relax. I don't care about your stupid scribbles, but Dad might." When he left, I pressed my face into the pillow to muffle the sobs that escaped. He didn't care about me, but he cared about control. And if he told my dad about the notebooks, I wasn't sure what would happen. That night, I packed the most important one, the one with the gas station story, into my school bag. I carried it with me everywhere, even to bed, afraid to leave it behind. Days passed, and Claire checked in on me through small notes slipped into my locker at the library where she volunteered. Little things like "keep writing" or "you are stronger than you think." Those notes were lifelines, tiny reminders that I wasn't invisible. One afternoon, I sat on the library steps waiting for Claire. She arrived with a folder tucked under her arm. "I've been thinking," she said. "Do you still have those receipts your dad kept from the business?" I nodded, slowly. "He leaves them in a box in the garage." "Why?" "Because abuse is often tied to power. If he's been hiding things financially, it could help your case someday." The idea terrified me. Sneaking into his things felt like crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But at the same time, I knew she was right. My dad's cruelty wasn't only about what he did to me. It was about how he controlled everyone around him. That night after the house went quiet, I crept into the garage. My hands shook as I sifted through the box, the smell of oil and dust filling my nose. I slipped a few papers into my jacket and tiptoed back to my room. Under the glow of my desk lamp, I spread them out and realized what Claire had suspected: the numbers didn't add up. He wasn't just cruel, he was dishonest too. I copied the details into my notebook, my pulse racing. Every new piece of information felt like a brick in the wall I was building, between his world and mine. The next day, I gave the copies to Claire. She scanned them, her brow furrowed. "This is good, Sarah. It's dangerous, but it's good. Keep going." Her faith in me gave me strength, but the fear lingered. Every time my dad raised his voice, every time Nathan slammed a door, I thought of what might happen if they found out what I was doing. Yet the fire inside me kept pushing me forward. One evening, my mother sat beside me as I wrote. She glanced at the pages, her eyes glistening. "You're brave," she whispered. I looked at her, surprised. "You think so?" She nodded, her lips trembling. "I don't know how you do it. I've spent my life too afraid to fight back." Her words made my throat tighten. I reached for her hand. "Then let me fight for both of us." She squeezed my hand, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. At that moment, I knew my story was no longer just mine. It was hers too. And maybe one day it could be a weapon strong enough to free us both. I woke up the next morning with a pit in my stomach, as if I had swallowed something heavy that refused to move. The memory of my dad's voice on the phone about selling the land gnawed at me. That land was not just dirt and trees. It was my grandparents' legacy, the place where my grandmother used to hang laundry on a line that stretched between two tall oaks, the same land where my granddad built a small barn with his own hands. I could almost see their faces, kind and weathered, and I knew deep down they would never have wanted it reduced to chips in a poker game or fuel for my dad's greed. At breakfast, I tried to act normal, pouring cereal into my bowl while the kitchen smelled of bacon frying. My brother Nathan sat across from me, smirking as always, tapping his spoon against the edge of his bowl like a drummer keeping rhythm to his own smug beat. My mother moved slowly, her robe tied loosely, avoiding my eyes. My dad sat at the head of the table, his newspaper folded neatly, his coffee steaming in front of him. I watched his hands, the thick veins, the way his fingers gripped the cup too tightly, as if even the mug might slip from his control. Nathan leaned forward. "Remember that night at the gas station, Sarah? You should have seen your face. I swear you almost cried." His laugh was sharp, but I stayed quiet, spooning cereal into my mouth and chewing slowly. I did not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. That silence was harder for him than any insult I could throw back. His smirk faltered just a little, and I tucked that tiny victory away like a coin in my pocket. After breakfast, I went outside. The November air was cold, biting against my skin. I walked out to the edge of the property, where the old oak trees lined up like sentinels. I thought about what it would mean if my dad really sold the land, how it would erase the last piece of my grandparents I could still touch. My fists clenched, and for the first time, I began to imagine what fighting back might truly look like. Later that week, I decided to test the waters. I brought up the land casually while my dad was watching television, a game playing loudly on the screen. I asked if he had any plans for it. His head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing, suspicion written all over his face. "Why do you care?" he said, his tone sharp. I shrugged, pretending to be indifferent. "Just curious. I know Grandma and Grandpa worked hard for it." He snorted, waving his hand. "That land is mine to do with as I please. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong." The words stung, but they also confirmed what I feared. He did not see it as ours or even as part of our family history. He saw it as a tool, something he could cash in whenever he wanted. That night, I wrote in my notebook again, this time sketching out more than just notes. I started drawing timelines, arrows connecting pieces of information, circling the names of people I knew my dad gambled with. It was not neat, but it gave me clarity. If I wanted to protect myself, and maybe even protect what was left of my family's legacy, I needed to be smarter than them. One Saturday, I stayed late at the diner where I worked part-time washing dishes. The owner, Mrs. Callahan, was a stout woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a heart that was softer. Then she led on. As I wiped down the counters, she asked why I always seemed so serious. I hesitated, then told her a piece of the truth. I said my dad was trying to sell land that did not fully belong to him. She studied me for a long moment, then said, "You know, sweetheart, sometimes the law can be your friend even when family is not. Don't forget that." Her words stuck with me. That night back in my room, I began looking up property laws on the old desktop computer we had. The screen flickered, the dial-up connection painfully slow. But eventually I found enough to confirm what I suspected. If the land had been left to all of us, my dad could not just sell it without consent. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I was not powerless after all. But the more I dug, the more dangerous it felt. My dad was not a man who liked being questioned. I knew if he realized I was looking into his business, his anger could boil over into something worse. Still, I could not let it go. Every time I pictured my grandparents' faces, every time I remembered the sound of his laughter as they left me in that gas station parking lot, my resolve hardened. One evening, Nathan cornered me in the hallway. His voice was low, his breath smelling faintly of beer. "You think you're better than us now? Don't you always scribbling in that notebook acting like you're too smart? You better watch yourself." I stared at him, my pulse quickening, but I kept my face calm. "I don't think I'm better. I just know I won't be stuck here forever." His jaw tightened, and for a second I thought he might hit me. But he stepped back, shaking his head, muttering under his breath. I stood there in the dim light, my heart racing, realizing I had crossed a line. He could feel me slipping away, and it scared him. The tension in the house grew heavier each day, like a storm building on the horizon. I carried my notebook with me everywhere now, hidden deep in my backpack, as if it were a shield. At night, when the wind rattled the windows, I lay awake imagining the moment when all of this would turn, when they would see the truth of who I was becoming, and they would no longer laugh. One Sunday morning, as we sat in church, I caught my dad glancing at me during the sermon. His gaze was sharp, calculating, as if he knew I was no longer the girl he thought he could control. For the first time, I did not look away. I held his stare until he shifted uncomfortably in the pew, and in that small moment, I felt stronger than I ever had before. I walked out of that church knowing my path would not be easy, but it would be mine. The girl they left at the gas station was gone. In her place was someone who had begun to understand that revenge did not have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes it was patient, quiet, and waiting for the right moment. And deep down, I knew that moment was coming. The tension in our house had grown so thick by December that every sound seemed louder, every word sharper. My dad's boots thudding across the wooden floor made me flinch, and Nathan's laughter in the living room felt like a constant reminder of the night they abandoned me at the gas station. But instead of shrinking, I found myself watching them more carefully, storing every detail like puzzle pieces I would someday fit together. One cold evening, I walked home from my shift at the diner, the wind cutting through my thin coat. As I approached the driveway, I saw headlights spilling across the gravel. My dad was in the truck speaking with a man I didn't recognize. The man was tall, dressed in a dark jacket, and he kept glancing nervously at the house. I ducked behind the old oak tree and listened. "I'll get you the deed soon," my dad said, his voice tight. "She doesn't know a thing. It'll be clean." The man nodded quickly, then handed him something that looked like an envelope. My dad tucked it into his jacket pocket, then lit a cigarette. My breath caught. He was planning to push forward with the land deal. He had no intention of asking me or anyone else. He was going to erase my grandparents' memory for cash. I hurried inside before he saw me. My hands trembled as I pulled out my notebook. I wrote everything down: the man's appearance, the time, the words I heard. My writing was messy ink smudging across the page, but I did not care. Every detail mattered. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what Mrs. Callahan had said about the law being a friend. Maybe the time had come to stop just observing. Maybe it was time to act. The following week at school, I stayed late in the computer lab. I searched for property records, trying to figure out if the land was still legally tied to my name. My heart pounded as the old printer spat out a few pages of records. I stuffed them into my backpack, hiding them behind my textbooks. When I got home, I locked my bedroom door and studied them under the yellow glow of my desk lamp. My suspicions were confirmed. The land had been left equally to all of us. My dad had no right to sell it on his own. The discovery sent adrenaline rushing through me. For the first time, I felt like I had something real, something that could protect me. Still, fear lingered. If he found out what I knew, I was not sure how far his anger would go. That Saturday, I tried to talk to my mother again. She was folding laundry in the living room, her face tired and drawn. I sat beside her holding the papers in my lap. "Mom," I whispered, "he's trying to sell the land. He doesn't have the right." She sighed, pressing her hand to her forehead. "Sarah, you don't understand how your dad works. He always finds a way. Fighting him will only make things worse." Her resignation broke my heart. She had already surrendered, and she wanted me to do the same. I shook my head. I can't just stand by. It's not only about the land, it's about us, about what they did to me. For a brief second, I thought I saw guilt in her eyes, but it faded quickly, replaced by fear. She turned back to the laundry and said nothing more. That silence confirmed what I already knew. I could not count on her. I was truly alone in this fight. One evening, as I sat on the porch steps, Nathan sauntered out, his grin lazy, a beer bottle dangling from his fingers. He leaned against the railing watching me. "You're getting bold, aren't you?" he sneered. "Dad says you've been asking too many questions. You better quit before you get yourself into real trouble." I forced myself to meet his eyes. Maybe I'm not afraid of trouble anymore. For the first time, his grin faltered. He muttered somethings under his breath and walked back inside. My hands were shaking, but inside I felt a strange surge of strength. They were starting to see it, the shift in me. The next week, I went back to the diner. After my shift, I stayed behind to talk to Mrs. Callahan again. I told her more this time. She listened carefully, her brow furrowed. "You're smart to write things down," she said. "Keep doing that. And Sarah, don't let them scare you. Sometimes the quiet ones, the ones they underestimate, are the ones who win in the end." Her words became fuel. That night, I wrote a new vow in my notebook. I promised myself that one day, my dad and Nathan would face the consequences of everything they had done. Not just for the gas station, not just for the land, but for all the years they tried to crush me. The house grew colder as winter deepened, the walls echoing with unspoken tension. My dad's voice was sharper, Nathan's temper quicker, my mother's silence heavier. I carried my secret papers with me everywhere, folded tightly in my bag. They were more than documents. They were my lifeline. Still, I knew papers alone would not be enough. I needed patience. I needed to wait for the right moment. But deep down I also knew that moment was coming closer. And when it did, I would be ready. The girl they thought they could break was gone. In her place was someone they had created with their cruelty, someone who had learned to turn humiliation into strength. And in the silence of my room with the notebook open on my desk, I realized that revenge was no longer just a thought. It was a path and I was already walking it. That spring, everything felt like it was about to snap. The air in our house was thick, heavy with tension that never seemed to lift. My dad's footsteps grew louder, angrier. Nathan's smirks became sharper, like he could sense that I was slipping out of their grasp. And my mother, though she tried to hide it, was constantly on edge, her hands trembling when she poured coffee or folded laundry. I carried the recordings with me, tucked away on a small flash drive hidden inside the lining of my backpack. I checked for it constantly, terrified someone might discover it. That audio of my dad laughing about abandoning me was my shield, my one piece of undeniable truth. Claire insisted it would be enough to shake the ground beneath him, but only if I survived long enough to use it. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table with Claire. She spread out the documents we had gathered so far, her expression serious. "Sarah," she said, lowering her voice, "you've built something strong. But you need to understand when this comes to light, it won't just be about the fraud or the abuse. It will be about destroying the image your dad has spent his whole life building. He will come at you with everything he has." Her words made me shiver, but they also steeled me. "He already has," I said quietly, "every day of my life." She gave me a long look, then nodded. "Then we'll prepare for the storm." The storm came sooner than either of us expected. It was a Friday night, and the house was filled with the smell of whiskey. My dad's laughter boomed through the walls, followed by Nathan's. I kept to my room trying to stay invisible, but sometime after midnight, the door burst open. My dad stumbled in his face, read his breath heavy with alcohol. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he spat, waving one of my notebooks in his hand. My heart stopped. He had found one. I stood my knees trembling. "Give that back." He laughed a deep, cruel sound, "Writing stories about me. About this family. You think anyone cares about? Your little lies." "They're not lies," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "They're the truth." His expression hardened. He stepped closer, so close I could see the veins in his neck. "The truth is what I say it is. And if you think you can turn anyone against me, you're dumber than I thought." I swallowed hard, my body frozen with fear. But somewhere deep inside a spark of defiance rose. "You left me," I whispered. "At that gas station. You laughed. And now I have proof." For a moment, the color drained from his face. Then he snarled and slammed the notebook against the wall. "You don't know what you've started." He stormed out, leaving the door wide open, his heavy steps echoing down the hallway. I collapsed onto my bed, shaking so hard I thought my bones might break. He knew. The secret war I had been fighting in silence was no longer hidden. The next morning, my mother found me pale and trembling. She closed the door and sat beside me. "He's furious," she whispered. "You need to be careful." "I can't stop now," I said, clutching the flash drive in my pocket. "If I do, he wins." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Then we'll stand together." That same afternoon, I met Claire at the small cafe downtown. I told her everything, my voice cracking as I recounted what had happened. She reached across the table, her grip firm. "Sarah, listen to me. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. But you need to stay calm. Fear is what he feeds on. Don't give it to him." Her words steadied me. For the first time, I believed that I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting. In the days that followed, my dad's behavior grew more erratic. He barked at Nathan over small mistakes, shouted at my mother for things she hadn't done. The house felt like it was vibrating with anger, as if the walls themselves might split open. Nathan, sensing the shift, turned his suspicion fully on me. He lingered in doorways, hovered when I made phone calls, followed me when I went for walks. One afternoon, he cornered me by the garage. "I don't know what you're up to," he said, his eyes cold. "But if you think you can take Dad down, you're dead wrong." I stared back at him, forcing my voice not to shake. "I don't need to take him down. He's doing that all by himself." His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might hit me. But then he smirked that cruel smile I had grown to hate and walked away. That night I lay awake, listening to the house creak and groan. Every sound made my heart race, but instead of fear consuming me, I felt something else building resolve. If they wanted me silent, they would have to drag me into the ground to keep me there. A week later, Claire arranged for me to meet an attorney who specialized in family law. We met in the back of a bookstore, the smell of old pages wrapping around us like a cloak. I laid out the recordings, the documents, and the notebook. The attorney listened carefully, nodding as he flipped through each page. "You have a strong case," he said finally, "but you need to be ready." Men like your dad don't just give up. He'll try to break you down, smear your name, maybe even scare you into silence. Are you prepared for that? My throat tightened, but I lifted my chin. I've been living in silence for years. I'm ready to speak. The attorney studied me, then gave a small nod. Then let's make sure your voice is heard. Walking home that night, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The path ahead was dangerous, but it was finally clear. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to my dad's cruelty. I was taking control of it. But control is fragile. And in a house ruled by a man like him, it can shatter in an instant. A few days later, my dad's rage exploded. I had just returned from school when he confronted me in the living room, his face twisted with fury. "You think you can betray me?" he shouted. "After everything I've done for this family." My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "You didn't build this family, you broke it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then he stepped closer, his voice low and venomous. "You don't know what you've started, but you'll regret it." He stormed out, leaving me trembling but unbroken. That night, as I clutched the flash drive in my hand, I whispered to myself, "Not this time. This time I will fight." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The week after my dad confronted me in the living room was like living under a storm cloud. Every room in the house felt charged, as if lightning could strike at any moment. I learned to move quietly, to keep my eyes down, to hide the smallest traces of what I was doing. But no matter how careful I was, I knew Nathan was watching me, waiting for me to slip. One evening, I sat with my mother in the kitchen. The overhead light flickered, and the sound of my dad's television rumbled from the den. My mother leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's more suspicious than ever. He asked me today if I knew what you were hiding. I told him nothing, but he doesn't believe me." Her eyes were tired, red-rimmed. I reached across the table, taking her hand. "We'll get through this," I said. My voice sounded braver than I felt. That night, I wrote in my notebook until my hand cramped. I wrote about every moment of fear, every word my dad had thrown like a dagger, every smirk Nathan had given me in the hallways. But I also wrote about Claire, about the attorney, about the flicker of hope that was starting to grow inside me. The next morning, as I packed my bag for school, Nathan appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, his arms crossed. "You've been busy," he said. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. I froze my bag half-zipped. "I don't know what you're talking about," he smirked. "Sure you don't. But Dad thinks you're planning something. And if you're smart, you'll quit while you're ahead." I clenched my fists at my sides. "I'm not scared of you." He laughed, shaking his head. "You should be." Then he walked away, leaving me with the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Later that afternoon, I met Claire at the cafe. I told her what had happened, how Nathan's words felt like knives. She frowned, stirring her coffee slowly. "He's trying to scare you, that's all. People like your dad and Nathan, they rely on fear. The moment you stop feeding it to them, their power starts to crumble." I wanted to believe her, but when I went home that evening, the fear was still there, heavy as ever. A few nights later, everything shifted. I had been sitting at my desk, copying down more financial records I'd taken from the garage. The house was quiet, too quiet. Suddenly, the door burst open. My dad stood there, his face red with fury, Nathan just behind him. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, holding one of the receipts I thought I had hidden. My heart dropped. I couldn't speak. "You think you can steal from me? You think you can undermine me in my own house?" His voice shook the walls. I forced myself to stand, though my knees trembled. "I'm not stealing. I'm exposing the truth." For a moment, there was silence. Then he laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. "Truth, you wouldn't know the truth if it slapped you in the face. You're nothing but an ungrateful little brat." Nathan stepped forward, his eyes cold. "You should just give it up, Sarah. You'll never win." I looked at both of them and something inside me hardened. Maybe not, but I won't be silent anymore. My dad's face darkened, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But instead he turned and stormed out, Nathan on his heels. When the door slammed shut, I collapsed into my chair, shaking from head to toe. I knew then that the walls were closing in. They were on to me. I couldn't wait any longer. The next morning I met Claire again. I showed her the receipt, explained what had happened. Her face tightened with concern. "Sarah, it's only going to get worse from here. You need to be ready for whatever they throw at you. Are you prepared to face them publicly?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I can't live like this anymore." She smiled faintly, though her eyes were worried. "Then, let's make sure you have everything in place. They won't know what hit them." That night I lay awake, listening to the storm outside. Rain tapped against the windows, thunder rolled in the distance. It felt like the world was reflecting the chaos inside our house. I thought about the gas station, about the moment my dad had laughed and driven away. That was when he had broken me. But now, years later, I realized that was also the moment I began to rebuild myself. Every page I had written, every secret I had uncovered, every recording I had saved, it all traced back to that night. The girl he had left behind was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone ready to fight. Still, fear gnawed at me. What if Claire was wrong? What if the attorney couldn't help? What if my dad destroyed everything before I even had a chance to speak? The next day, my mother found me in the kitchen staring at my notebook. She sat down beside me, her hand gentle on my arm. "You're scared," she said softly. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. "What if I can't do this?" She looked at me, her voice steady. "Sarah, you already are. Every day you speak, every page you write. Every time you stand your ground, you're doing it. You're stronger than you think." Her words sank deep into me, a balm against the fear. That evening, Nathan cornered me again in the hallway. "You think you're brave now, don't you?" he sneered. "But Dad's not going to let you ruin him. He'll crush you before you get the chance." I met his gaze, my voice steady. "Maybe, but at least I won't go down silent." For the first time, his smirk faltered. He turned and walked away without another word. I stood there, my heart pounding, realizing something important. He was afraid too. The storm wasn't just mine anymore, it was theirs, and it was only a matter of time before it broke wide open. The days after my mother agreed to testify felt like living with a glass of water balanced on my head. Every step had to be slow, every breath measured, because one sudden motion could spill everything we were building. My dad sensed the shift before we spoke it aloud, and that made the air in the house electric. My mother kept busy with quiet tasks, folding towels with sharp corners, wiping the same clean counter, checking the stove twice. I wrote more than I slept, and when I did sleep, my mind kept writing for me, stitching details together into a thread I could finally hold. Claire met us on a Monday afternoon and laid out her plan with a patience that soothed my nerves. She wanted duplicates of each record and a safe place beyond the reach of anger. We chose the credit union on Main Street because no one in our circle worked there, and the clerks never asked more than necessary. Driving over felt like a normal errand. Yet my hands were clammy on the wheel, and my mother watched the mirrors as if they were windows into our future. We rented a box, signed our names, and placed a flash drive inside, along with copies of the deed history and a typed summary of dates. The lid slid shut with a soft click that sounded like a promise I had been waiting to hear since the night under the harsh station lights. Afterwards, we went to Claire's office, and my mother began a written statement. She started with simple facts and circled back when memory knotted her breath. Claire told her to rest when the room tilted and to return when her hands were steady. I sat nearby and gathered small pieces that might look like nothing alone. The raised voice after midnight, the slammed door that rattled picture frames, the apology that never came. My mother wrote about fear as if it had weight and shape. It did. It lived in our hallways and our closets and the space between sentences. Seeing her name above those lines felt like a lantern lit in a window I had long thought broken. We talked about safety without letting the word feel like surrender. Claire said control will claw harder when it slips. She had us prepare phrases that were true but short. My mother practiced saying that she would speak later and that the conversation was done. We chose places to meet if we were split by anger. The church lot, the diner back door, Claire's reception area with the fern that never seemed to die. I copied the list and slid it into the lining of my purse beside a folded photograph of my grandparents standing in the potato field smiling into the wind. At the diner, Mrs. Callahan pressed an extra key into my palm without asking. "Why?" She said a woman needs a door that opens when the world tries to close on her. I put the key on a ribbon and wore it under my shirt and felt less alone. That evening, I worked a later shift, and the clatter of plates steadied me. Two sisters in their 70s split a slice of pie and argued softly about whether grief makes a person kinder or harder. I refilled their coffee and thought about my mother and how grief had done both to her at once. Sunday service came with bright sun and a choir that sang from memory. My dad stood near the exit greeting people like a mayor, his hand steady on the shoulder of each man who praised his work ethic. Nathan laughed with friends who knew only the public version of our home. My mother kept her eyes on the hymnal, and I watched dust lift through the window light. On the walk to the car, my dad mentioned that he was planning a barbecue for next weekend so the neighborhood could catch up. He said we looked like a strong family. He did not need to say the lesson tucked inside the words. He wanted witnesses. Tuesday brought a phone call from the county clerk. She asked to confirm our address for a copy request on the property file. The name she gave me was not familiar. I wrote it down, thanked her, and phoned Claire from the park where the swing chains creaked in a soft wind. By evening, Claire had traced the name to a man who sometimes arranged quiet deals for people who preferred not to leave fingerprints. We added his name to our list and underlined it twice. That night, Nathan tried my door and found it locked. He told the wood that secrets eat their makers and that girls who hide things always regret it. I sat on the floor with my back to the bed and counted breaths until his footsteps thudded away. When the house settled, I checked the hollow under the loose floorboard where I kept one spare copy, then slid the board back in place and pushed the rug smooth with my palm. I told myself that fear could walk the hall without an invited entry if I kept my plan patient. On Wednesday, Claire set up a camera and my mother practiced giving her statement. The small red light blinked while she found a steady rhythm. She spoke of the first time he laughed when I cried and the years that taught us both to pretend it was nothing. She described the gas station and my empty hands, and how the sound of tires scraping gravel still woke her before dawn. When she faltered, Claire reminded her to name only what she knew and not to borrow blame. By the end, my mother sat straighter in her chair. She looked like herself and also like someone new. We drove home through the blue hour that makes every house look like a softer version of itself. At the kitchen table, we shared a sandwich and split a pear and did not talk about the tape. Silence can be a blanket when speech feels like a blade. Later, I walked the backyard and stood by the fence where the field begins and imagined my grandparents picking rocks from the rows so the plow would not catch. Work had been their language. I decided that building a case could be my work. Thursday evening, I visited the hardware store and bought door wedges and batteries and a cheap motion light for the back steps. The clerk made a small joke about home improvement and I nodded because sometimes smiling is easier than explaining. Back home, I tested everything, while my mother watched from the doorway with an expression that mixed pride with worry. The light clicked on when I walked past, and for a moment I believed in small, bright things. On Friday, I took a long shift at the diner. I needed the hours to push my thoughts into a straight line. A couple in their 80s ate grilled cheese and talked about the year they almost lost the farm and how the bank manager had quietly given them an extra week. I carried that story around all afternoon the way a person carries a smooth stone in a pocket. It reminded me that mercy exists even in rooms where numbers matter most. When I returned home, the living room held that wrong order only families noticed. A cushion slightly moved, a drawer not quite closed. My papers were on the desk, but their edges had a new fan. My dad sat on the back steps with a beer and a calm smile that did not reach his eyes. He told me that I should enjoy the weekend because change was coming and that lucky people ride the wave instead of getting dragged. I said nothing and went inside and wrote his words down before they could blur. Saturday morning, my mother and I drove out to the family land. The field lay bare beneath a pale sky, and the old barn leaned like a tired man. We walked the fence line, and my mother told me how her dad planted by the moon and swore the earth listens if you speak to it kindly. I rested my hand on a fence post still warm from the sun and promised the air that we were trying to do right by the people who came before us. It felt strange and good to speak that promise aloud. On the way back, we stopped at a thrift store and bought 2 picture frames and a sweater for my mother that made her eyes look greener. At home, she placed our grandparents' photograph on the mantel. It changed the room more than paint ever could. My dad noticed and said the house did not need relics. My mother answered that history is not a relic when you live on it. I breathed and kept walking. The weeks that followed felt like living on the edge of a knife. My mother and I spoke in whispers, careful to hide even the smallest glance that might give us away. At night, when the house was quiet, we sat together at the kitchen table, piecing through old bills and contracts I had stolen. She was nervous, her hands shaking as she read, but there was a new fire in her eyes. It was the first time I had seen her look less like a shadow and more like herself. One evening, I slipped into Claire's office with another set of documents tucked under my jacket. She flipped through the papers, her expression grave. "This is enough to start," she said softly. "But if we want the law on your side, we'll need something undeniable. Something that shows not only his corruption but also his cruelty." Her words echoed in my mind for days. Cruelty. That was easy enough. I had lived it. The challenge was proving it in a way no one could deny. My chance came sooner than I expected. One Friday night, my dad and Nathan sat on the porch drinking beer. I lingered in the hallway out of sight, listening. Their voices drifted through the screen door. "You should have seen her face," my dad said, laughing. "Standing there at that gas station like a lost puppy. Best joke I ever pulled." Nathan chuckled, the sound low and cruel. "She's still scared of you." "That's power, Dad. You can't buy that." I felt bile rise in my throat. My knees shook, but my mind sharpened. For the first time, I knew exactly what to do. I slipped my phone out of my pocket and hit record. The next day, I played the audio for Claire. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing. This is gold. It's not just business fraud anymore. It's abuse, abandonment, intentional harm. Sarah, this could change everything. Hearing her say that lit something in me. For years, I had been the silent victim the girl left behind. Now I was the one holding the weapon. But with every step forward, the danger grew. My dad's temper flared more often. He barked at my mother for small things, snapped at me over nothing. Nathan followed me with those sharp, suspicious eyes, as if he knew I was slipping from his grasp. One night, as I wrote in my notebook, my mother knocked on my door. She slipped inside, pale and trembling. "He's starting to watch me too," she whispered. "He knows something is wrong." I took her hand. "Then we need to move faster." The following week, Claire arranged a meeting with a local attorney who specialized in family law. We met in the back corner of a quiet cafe, the hum of conversation around us like a protective shield. I laid the papers, the recordings, and the notebook on the table. The attorney leafed through them, nodding slowly. "You've built a strong case," he said, "but you need to be ready. Men like your dad don't go down without a fight. He'll try to smear you, discredit you, maybe even scare you into silence. Are you prepared for that?" My hands shook under the table, but I forced myself to nod. "I've been living in silence for years. I'm ready to speak." The attorney gave me a long look, then glanced at my mother. She squeezed my hand in silent agreement. That night I walked home under the streetlights, the cool spring air brushing against my skin. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. But it was tangled with fear. My dad was like a storm, unpredictable, destructive, relentless. And storms always hit hardest just before they break. A few days later, that storm cracked open. It was a Sunday afternoon when my dad burst into my room without knocking. He held one of my notebooks in his hand, the pages bent and wrinkled from his grip. His face was red veins bulging in his neck. "What the hell is this?" he roared. My breath caught in my throat. The room spun, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. The truth. He slammed the notebook against the dresser, papers flying. "You think you can betray me? After everything I've done for this family, I stood my ground, though my legs trembled. "You didn't build this family. You broke it." For a moment, he just stared at me, his chest heaving. Then, in a move that made my blood freeze, he leaned in close, his voice low and venomous. "You don't know what you've started, but you'll regret it." He stormed out, the sound of his boots echoing down the hall. I collapsed onto the bed, my body shaking uncontrollably. He knew now. There was no more hiding. That evening, I called Claire from the payphone near the library. My voice cracked as I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sarah, listen to me. This isn't the end. It's the beginning, but you need to be careful. Stay close to your mother, and don't back down." Her words steadied me, even as fear clawed at my chest. When I returned home, my mother was waiting by the window. She pulled me into her arms, whispering, "We'll get through this. Together." For the first time, I believed her. Still, as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought echoed in my mind. My dad had always underestimated me, but soon he would realize that the girl he left behind at that gas station was no longer the same. The silent revenger he had created was ready to strike. The gavel fell and the room went still in a way I felt inside my ribs. Guilty rose like a bell over water, clear and steady, and then the echo faded into the old wood of the benches. I did not move. My hands stayed folded so I would not reach for my mother like a child. She leaned into me anyway, and our shoulders met bone to bone, a simple proof that we had crossed the worst mile together. I looked at my dad and waited for the familiar curl at the corners of his mouth. It did not come. The judge finished speaking, and the officer called for order, but the words I needed had already landed. Years earlier, the sound had been different. I had stood under a hard light outside a lonely station with 2 cold sodas in my hands, and the noise I heard was laughter drifting down the highway. Today, the noise was a single word that named what happened and gave it weight. I breathed it in the way a person breathes after surfacing from deep water. When we stood to leave, Claire gathered our files with the care a nurse gives to a newborn. Reporters moved toward us with pens ready, but Claire lifted a hand and made a small path through the crowd. Out on the steps, the spring air sat soft on my skin. A woman in a blue coat touched my sleeve and said she was sorry that she had laughed back then. She said she believed me now. The apology found a dry place in me and watered it. For the first time, I thought the town might grow new roots. We drove home with the windows cracked just enough to taste fresh air. My mother kept looking up as if the sky might write a sentence we could keep. Inside the house, we took off our shoes and opened the windows and let the curtains billow. The cat came out from under the couch and wound around my mother's ankles like the house itself had taken a deep breath. She brewed tea and sliced an apple, and we ate without talking. Silence felt like folded linen, clean and serviceable, and ours. The next few days were filled with plain tasks that felt like holy work. Claire filed the last papers. The clerk corrected the record, so the land stood in my mother's name and mine, which had been true all along. We changed the lock on the back door and set a small motion light by the step. We painted the mailbox and wrote our names in steady letters. Each small act pushed the old fear a foot farther from the threshold. Neighbors came by with casseroles, as if food could build a bridge back to normal life. It did not fix everything, but it reminded us that we were seen, and seen kindly. Nathan left town within 2 weeks. He did not knock or call. Word reached us that he was working in a garage by the river, in a place where no one knew our story. I wrote him a letter. I told him I wanted him to learn a gentler kind of strength than the one our dad prized. I told him I could listen if he chose truth over pride. I mailed it and let the result belong to time. Some grief can be folded and put away without being denied. My dad asked for a visit before transfer. Claire reminded me that I did not owe him a minute. I sat with that advice and then said yes because I wanted an end that had my voice inside it. The room smelled like bleach and old coffee. We sat across a scratched table, and for the first time, he seemed small. He tried a half smile that never reached his eyes. He asked if I felt proud. I said I felt free. He said I would regret this. I said regret lives with a person who laughs at a crying child. He looked past me at the window and his jaw worked and then went still. I stood, thanked the officer, and walked out into a hallway that felt wider than it had an hour before. Healing came without parade or confetti. It arrived like morning light, slow and honest. One day I made coffee and did not listen for footsteps in the hall. Another day, I drove alone to the bank to place originals in the box and did not scan the lot for shadows. My mother dropped a spoon and did not flinch. We both slept through the night more often than not. On Saturdays, we drove to the land with sandwiches and a thermos and sat on the fence and planned repairs like any other family might do. The town began to shift as if it had been waiting for permission. Mrs. Reed brought cookies and told my mother that marigolds needed pinching to grow bushy. Mr. Henson mended a section of screen that had slapped in the wind for years. A young man who once smirked in the grocery line carried a new storm door up the steps and asked if he could hang it for practice before trying his own. My mother offered money. He asked only for water. People can change when truth stands steady in front of them. Late in summer, we held a workday at the land. Ivy had dragged the barn roof low, and the spring path was lost to thorn. We cut and hauled and stacked. Kids from church raced with scrap wood and laughed until they fell in the grass. My mother sat on the step and showed 2 girls how to save seeds from marigolds. I watched her hands and saw that they no longer shook. In the afternoon, Mr. Henson taught me how to brace a post with a simple trench and a wedge of old plank. The fence stood without leaning. We stood with it and took in the view, as if the horizon had moved a little closer. Some nights were still rough. Dreams found me with bright station lights and tire noise and a voice that mocked me by name. I woke with my heart thudding and sat at the window until the sky turned from black to blue. Then I made tea and read a few pages of a paperback, and the fear walked out of the room like an unwelcome guest. I kept reminders nearby for those hours. A smooth fieldstone on the table. A photo of my grandparents in the potato row. A note that said, breathe and then breathe again. I did not shame myself for the dreams. The body remembers. It also learns. As the first frost silvered the lawn, we pulled the last tomatoes and saved seed from flowers. The kitchen smelled like soup and bread, and the windows fogged while we washed dishes. We began to make plans like other families do. We would fix the roof in spring. We would host a picnic in June for the people who had stood beside us. We would keep telling the truth when asked and guard our quiet when not asked. I started a folder labeled Future and tucked in ideas like slips of paper at a wishing tree. Some were small like paint swatches for the porch. Some were larger like a budget for classes at the community college. On a clear evening, I returned to the station where the worst night had begun. The sign still buzzed, and the pavement still held an old oil stain. I stood by the pillar where I had waited and placed my palm against the cool concrete. I did not feel rage. I felt patient mercy for the girl I had been. I told her in my head that she had found the road home and that she had brought others with her. I walked back to the car and drove away without looking in the mirror. I did not need to keep the past in sight for it to teach me. It had done its work. Not everyone understood. One of my dad's old friends stopped me outside the hardware store and said that good men make mistakes. I said that good men do not turn fear into a tool and call it humor. He said I had ruined a reputation. I said I had revealed one. He shook his head and walked away. I stood taller after he turned the corner. Another woman from church hugged me and whispered that she had left a cruel marriage years ago and had never told anyone. She said my voice kept her company at night. I held her a moment longer than a polite hug and told her that company goes both ways. I kept writing, but the pages looked different now. They held scenes instead of secrets, the smell of rain on hot pavement, the sound of my mother humming while she watered herbs on the porch, the way the house settles after midnight like a boat easing into its slip. Fear still visited, but it got fewer lines. I read pieces aloud to my mother, and she closed her eyes and nodded when a sentence carried the truth. Words felt like steady boards laid over places that used to swallow my steps. Some days I wrote about justice and mercy. Some days I wrote about bread dough and the way it rises if you give it time and warmth. If you are still with me, I want to tell you what I learned. People who harm others rely on silence. They hope shame will do the work for them. They expect the girl at the curb to stay there. If any part of my story fits inside your own ribs, take one small step tonight. Write a sentence. Tell a trusted friend. Place a copy of a document in a safe box. Speak to a counselor or a pastor. Sit with someone who believes you until your breath goes smooth. Quiet steps build a strong road. They built mine. I plan to keep speaking. I will keep sharing accounts of family conflict and stubborn courage and the kind of justice that does not need to raise its voice. If my journey has moved you, tell me. Share what resonated or what you faced or what you wish someone had told you. Sooner, tap like so this reaches the person who needs it. Subscribe if you want to sit with me for more evenings where truth is spoken, steady and compassion remains in the room. Your voice matters. Your presence here matters too.